everybody, this is Leonard here and welcome back to my kitchen. This is an ongoing series where we make different type of bread from the basic white breads all the way to complex sourdoughs at home. So the bread we're going to be making today is a bread that has different types of flours in it, but it also has seeds, nuts and also dried fruits in it. You can call it a country style loaf, you can call it a wholemeal loaf, whatever you want. Now to get started, you need your high protein flour and you need your high fiber flour of choice. Now generally speaking, you can use any high fiber flour from wholemeal flour to rye flour. Me personally, I love to use chapati flour or atta flour as well. It's really affordable and it's high fiber and it's really healthy for you as well. You will also need some commercial yeast, you will also need some water, salt, and those are the general basic ingredients you need to get started. You can obviously add things like seeds, nuts and dried fruits. I'm also adding a bit of tenderizers in the form of sugar as well as some olive oil, but those are purely optional if you don't want to use them whatsoever. Now in terms of kitchen equipment, I am using a cast iron pan to bake the bread. I'm using a bread basket this time, and I'm also using a stand mixer. You will also need a razor blade, but that's optional. You can also use a sharp knife, and obviously you also need an oven, preferably with a steam function. If you do not have that, you can also use a squirt gun with water. Now into a weighing scale, you want to measure out your flour first. So we're going to be using 350 grams of high protein flour or bread flour to create that nice gluten and elasticity, and we're going to use 150 grams of high fiber flour. I'm using a mixture of rye and wholemeal flour today, but again, you can use atta flour, you can use semolina, you can really use any high fiber style flour. That's perfectly fine. To that, I am going to be adding my yeast, approximately about 7 to 8 grams. The lower yeast you use, the longer the fermentation time. Now the more yeast you use, obviously the faster the bread making process will turn out, but if you use less yeast, the fermentation time will be longer, but you get a much more tasty, rich tasting bread at the end of the day. Now to that, we're going to add about a couple pinches of salt, about 2 to 3 grams, no more than 5 grams in this kind of bread making processes. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, as well as about a teaspoon of 5 grams of white sugar. You can use any sugar you want, but the idea here is that the sugar and the fat helps tenderize the bread a little bit to give it a much more softer feel, which from where I'm from in Malaysia, people tend to prefer over more European chewy style breads. Now I'm going to add 65% of water, which is getting on the higher hydration side of things. With higher hydration, you get a much better lift of the bread, and in my opinion, the texture is also much more better as well. We're going to put that into our stand mixer with the dough hook function, and we're going to get it kneading for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Now generally at the 8 to 12 minutes mark, you will see the dough getting stronger and you will see it starting to fling itself around the walls of the stand mixing bowl. Now at that point, you can take it off, get your hands wet a little bit and stretch it and see if it passes the window pane test, which is basically a simple way to say the gluten network has been well developed. And we're going to cover it with some cling film and we're going to let it bulk ferment. This is a stage whereby flavor will be developed. If you don't have time, just leave it in a nice warm environment. In about 1.5 to 2 hours, you will see it double in size. Now alternatively, if you want this to be a much more flavorful bread, do bulk ferment this in the fridge itself for 6 to 8 hours and you'll get a much better tasting loaf at the end of the day. Now in the meantime, we're going to chop up our seeds, nuts and dried fruits. I'm using some mixed nuts that I have lying around, and I'm also adding some dried cranberries as well as some chia seeds. You can mix it up to whatever you want, but frankly speaking, anyone will do. Now with the seeds and nuts toasted and mixed well with the dried fruits, you can proceed with actually mixing it into the dough. Now I've tried to do the lamination step, which is a way whereby you stretch the dough and then you fill it up and then you fold it into itself. For some reason it didn't turn out quite well and I'm left with a lot of centralized nuts here instead, and resulting in a kind of like gap in the middle of the dough, which is not what I'm looking for. Now you can obviously mix in with the dough at the beginning of the mixing step. The only concern with that method is that it potentially may interfere with the gluten development and the gluten network within the dough itself. But obviously I gotta get a little bit better with how I laminate the seeds into my dough and shape it a bit better. Whether you use the lamination step or whether you use the dough mixing step, the most important thing is that the seeds, nuts and dried fruits are well distributed throughout the dough and you allow the dough to bulk ferment really well. Now to shape, you can use flour or you could just use water, which I personally prefer to use. By using water, it's much easier to handle the dough and you don't introduce more drying materials or more flour into the mix. which can cause the dough to be a bit more tougher at the end. I will then transfer to my dusted bread basket. You can dust it with just plain old flour, but I'm using a mixture of flour as well as rice flour. The rice flour just makes it a little bit less absorbent, which makes it a bit more non-stick. Now into the bread basket, it's going to proof now. This is the final rise for it to gain more volume, to get a bit more height in the actual baking process. Now that will take anywhere between half an hour to 45 minutes, and in the meantime, you can go ahead and preheat your oven to anywhere between 180 degrees Celsius to 200 degrees Celsius with your cast iron pan or any tray of choice. So once it's proofed, we're going to transfer it into a parchment paper and put it onto our preheated pan, and we're going to bake it at full steam ahead or just give it a squirt of the spritz bottle, and we're going to let it cook. Depending on how much crust you like. I like my bread a bit more crusty, so I'm going to bake it at 200 degrees Celsius for a good 15-18 minutes, and then lower it down to 180 for the remainder time, in total of 35 minutes at the end of the bake. You can obviously just do 180 degrees Celsius all the way, and that will result in a softer crumb, but that's up to you. So once it's baked, you can see how nice it's risen. You can see the beautiful texture of the bread itself. And you want to let it rest for a good 30 minutes if you're really rushing, but ideally at least 2-3 hours. That's to let all the starches relax down and makes a much more better cutting experience and tasting experience later on as well. The other thing is that if you don't wait for it to cool down and you cut straight into it, the steam will escape and you will notice the bread being a little bit gummy as well. So there you have it. This is our country style high fiber bread using commercial yeast. Let me know, did you enjoy this video, and if you did, do consider giving it a like. It really helps. If you enjoy video like this and you want more content like this, do let us know in the comments and do consider subscribing. We make videos periodically every single week. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one, which is another style of bread. So do stay tuned if you want to check that out. Bye!
Loaf.